This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, His hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world. He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear Him pass. He speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let heaven ring. God reigns, let earth be glad.
Psalm 5 with me tonight, today rather, I've taken this on because it seems to me that it's closely connected with what we were looking at 2 weeks ago. The psalm in which David is talking about his experience when he fled from Absalom, his son. I believe this psalm fits in about that period in history. Of course, if you were to turn to the critics, you'd find all kinds of arguments why they say that it's a post-exilic psalm, which means, in other words, that some of them think that it was written after the return from captivity from Babylon, a long, long time, almost 500 years after the time of David. But I think that that's just one of the usual fancies of the modern critic, and I don't think it can really be substantiated from the psalm itself. One of the arguments they make is that the psalmist speaks about the house of God, going to the Lord's house. But that's quite ridiculous, because at least 6 times in the Old Testament the term the house of the Lord is used of the tabernacle. They have the idea it could only refer to the temple, but it doesn't. Long before the temple was erected, the tabernacle itself was described as the house of the Lord. For example, the earliest reference is way back in Exodus chapter 23 and verse 19, where instructions are laid down when they come to the house of the Lord. So that's not a valid argument. And again, one person says the way that David talks about his enemies, the way that the writer talks about his enemies, it wasn't the time of David, it must have been some foreign invading power many years after. Now, did you get that out of the psalm as you read it? I certainly didn't. Indeed, everything I read in this psalm seems to fit in with the kind of opposition that David was receiving about the time of his son Absalom's rebellion. But we'll have a look at it. In the first place, notice that it is a morning. Oh, no, let's look at the title first. For the chief musician, with the Nehiloth, it says, a psalm of David, the Nehiloth. Now, if you have a margin, you might find that in the margin it says, wind instruments. Well, that's perhaps interpreting the word Nehiloth rather loosely. to be very, very strict and correct about it, what it actually says is to the tune, the inheritances. Now, you remember what we said right at the very beginning? That there were popular tunes to the Psalms even way back in Old Testament times. And that very often a writer of a psalm would prescribe the tune to which the psalm was to be sung. And this is really what the word nihilov means. It only means wind instruments in a very loose sort of way. As a matter of fact, if it were to be wind instruments, the word would be an entirely different word. It would indicate that it came from the pipe, and the word for pipe would be used, but it's not used. And the word that is here is one that means the inheritances, which suggests, as I say, that David is prescribing the tune. You remember we had other tunes? The Silent Dove is the name of one of the psalms. Or the Lilies is the name of one of the psalms. So here is a tune, the inheritances. Right. But it's a morning song. And you see that from verse 3. O Lord, in the morning shalt thou hear my voice. In the morning will I order my prayer unto thee, and will keep watch. Now that's a technical expression, and this verse points out to us that this was connected with the morning sacrifice that was offered. In fact, that expression, I will order, in the Revised Version, is, I will make ready. And it indicates a man who's coming with a sacrifice to offer. Do you remember way back in the Old Testament in Genesis 22, when Abraham went to offer his son Isaac, he made ready the altar. And again later on in the first book of Kings, chapter 18, when Elijah had that tremendous contest with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, we're told that Elijah made ready. He ordered the altar. He put the altar in order. Now this is the same religious, sacrificial, technical expression. So here is a man coming first thing in the morning with his sacrifice to God, and he's approaching. In fact, the expression, I will keep watch, suggests a man waiting for the coming of God. He goes to God in worship and praise, he goes with his song, he goes with his sacrifice, he goes to wait on God, and he's watching for the coming of God, as it were. So really, this shows you how David began the day. It shows you the confidence that David had as he started the day. Now, I think we can learn something from this. I think that so far as our teaching concerning the doctrine of the church and the gospel, the organization of the church, we have no peers. Nobody can hold a candle to us. But I sometimes suspect we have a lot to learn when it comes to devotion, when it comes to personal dedication to God. I know that perhaps years and years ago it was the case that people had daily meditations, daily readings, and this was generally the case, but I think that today Christians who have this personal dedication and personal devotion, this regular daily devotion, these are getting fewer and fewer in number. I suppose we'd say that it's a much faster pace at which people live today than, say, in Victorian times, when they might have had a morning reading and a prayer and an evening reading and a prayer in a home. But we make all kinds of excuses for the fact that we do not give time to God for this morning prayer, this morning meditation that David talks about. And we have a great deal to learn from the Old Testament, and I think from some other religious peoples too, even non-Christian peoples, about morning devotion and daily meditation. We just don't take the time for morning prayer or morning Bible reading or morning meditation on the Word. And we neglect the example of Jesus in this. Jesus, we're told, rose very early in the morning before it was yet day, and went into a deserted place to pray. Now this was the pattern of the life of Jesus. Morning and evenings he was praying, and during the day he was serving the people. And I think every one of us needs to examine his own life, his own heart on this matter and ask ourselves, are we really spending enough time in dedication? You know, it's also possible we get so many things going in the building. So many communal activities going. Activities with our young people, with the men's meeting, the ladies' meeting, the young people's fellowship, the little Bible study. And we seem to lean upon the regular activities of the church as our staple diet in Christian living. That is not ought to be the case. We need to take the time privately and individually to think about things for ourselves. That's just the point. The first lesson we can learn from David here, that David is talking about the way he begins the day. And he begins with prayer. He says, "Hearken unto the voice of my cry, my King, my God, for unto thee do I pray." Now, this confidence is a very great one because he expresses that at verses 4 to 6. "For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, evil hath not sojourned with thee, even can't abide or can't stay with thee. The arrogant shall not stand." I don't know, I'm reading from Revised Version, I don't know what the Authorized Version says. "The foolish shall not stand." Well, it's the same thought. You see, this is interesting. The Authorized Version says foolish, and the Revised Version says arrogant. But boastful. Well, yeah, that's another one. Boastful. Now, this is all very good. Because, you know, we think of a fool today as a senseless person. But that's not so in the Bible. Foolishness in the Bible had a moral quality. The quality of wickedness. For example, the psalmist says later on, "The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God." Now, this is not just a man who doesn't know. Not a man who says that because he's a simpleton, he's absolutely ignorant. But it's his moral condition that makes him turn against God, the Bible says. It's the fact that he's a wicked man that he says there is no God, because he doesn't want to believe in God. So here, the Authorized Version says, "The foolish shall not stand, the boastful shall not stand, the arrogant shall not stand." And that's what David is talking about. He's talking about people who make no place for God in their lives. He's talking about people who do not present themselves before God. And that's really what the Hebrew says. He says, the arrogant come not before thee. The arrogant stand not in thy sight. In other words, the psalmist is saying, I'm standing in your presence. I've come because I recognize my need of you, but not so these other people. They have no place for you in their lives. And he says, "Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Thou shalt destroy them that speak lies. The Lord, or Jehovah, abhorreth the bloodthirsty and deceitful man." Now, it's pretty obvious that he's really concerned about these people, because these are the people who are opposed to him. And that's why I say it almost seems that this might have belonged to that period in David's life when he was having a really rough time with his son Absalom and with the other rebels among his people. He's come before God in his morning dedication, his morning worship, but this problem's at the back of his mind and he can't get it out because he turns in verse 7 and begins to speak differently. He feels that he's safe because he's in the presence of God, and he expresses his own desire to keep life with God. He says, "But as for me, in the multitude of thy loving kindness will I come into thy house. In thy fear will I worship towards thy holy temple. Lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way plain before my face." Now, this is his own problem. In the first place, he comes with a sense of gratitude. And I like that expression. In the multitude of thy loving kindness. Here is a man who is conscious of the blessings of God. And I think we need to learn something here too. How often in our prayers do we fill them with gimme, gimme, gimme? bless me, bless me and bless, that little old Yorkshire prayer that I've told you of before. Lord, bless me and my wife, our Joe, and his wife, us four, no more, amen. And so not so, we come to God like that. Lord, bless me, I need this, I need that. But here's a man, before he asks for anything, he said, ask for me, in the multitude of thy loving kindness will I come into thy house, overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude I come before you. Now this is praise. This is what God is looking for. After all, you wouldn't really appreciate it if every time somebody that you know, a friend or a child, your son or your daughter, if every time that person came to you to talk to you, it was with a hand stretched out. Give me. I'm sure that God is anxious to hear the request of Christians. He's told us to ask. But I think sometimes He probably waits for a little bit of gratitude, for a little bit of thank you. So here is David overwhelmed with the multitude of thy loving kindness. That can count your many blessings. This is really the attitude that David had, an awareness of, as Jeremiah says in the Lamentations, thy mercies are new every morning, great is thy faithfulness. Right, so he comes first of all with a sense of gratitude. And then he comes with reverent worship. In thy fear will I worship. In other words, in the fear of thee. Not that God was afraid, not in God's fear, but in the fear of God. Now, the word fear puts some other people off in the Old Testament. For example, thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and Him only shalt thou serve. Well, the word fear is not to be understood in the term of abject terror, or being afraid. The word fear is a word that has to do with reverence in the Old Testament. If you've got to use the word fear at all, put before it the adjective reverential fear. Reverential fear. The awe which comes from a sense of the majesty of God. The feeling of the overwhelming greatness and holiness and glory of the one into whose presence we're coming, of the one who has permitted us to come close to Him. The psalmist later on says, who shall appear in the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in thy holy place? Well, you're coming into the presence of the Creator of heaven and earth, the Almighty. And it's an amazing thing that God Himself permits us to come to Him and to offer our insignificant worship. And this is why David is giving us the second lesson. First, there's the idea of gratitude, of thankfulness. And then there's the idea of reverence. In thy fear will I worship thee. And then there's the thought of dependence on God. Lead me, verse 8, lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. Make thy way plain before my face. I like the word thy. He doesn't say make my way plain to me. Often we want our way. And He doesn't put Himself in there. He doesn't say, show me my way. But it's make thy way. What does that imply? It implies, of course, that He's considering the will of God. In other words, He's saying, you show me the way that you want me to go. Now this is submission to God. And very often we take our lives in our own hands, don't we? We get to be a little bit independent, every one of us in this respect. Well, nobody's going to tell you what to do. The advice may be good or bad, and we get a bit of both sometimes, don't we? And somebody comes along and says, I think you ought to do this, or I don't think you should do that. And we say, well, look, this is my life. I'm going to live it as I please. Who says it's your life? Not your life at all. And look, how much of your life have you got? What command have you over your life? How do you know you're going to take one breath after another? How can you say that you're going to live beyond this minute? Really, when we talk about my life, we can't really. let's recognize the fact that in Him we live and move and have our being. As Paul says, He gives to all life and breath, there it is, and all things. So my life isn't mine to do as I please with. And I'm not an independent entity on the earth. Which means that if I'm going to live life as it ought to be lived, I'm not going to live it selfishly, I'm going to follow the example of David. Make thy way plain before my face. Do you know why so many people go wrong in the world today? Do you know why so many lives end in disaster and people take steps that cause them misery for the whole of their lives? It's simply because they think that they know best what to do with their lives. And it's simply because they don't follow the example, not just of David, but of so many other men in the Bible who come along to God and say, look, here is my life, I lay my life before you, you show me the way that you want me to go, you show me the kind of life that you want me to lead, because I know that left to myself, my life is going to end up in disaster. But if I accept your decision on my life, then it will be a life worth living. It won't be an unhappy life because God doesn't want to make anybody unhappy. God wants us to live life to the full. And you know, the sum total of human unhappiness comes when men think they know best what to do with their lives. They think they want to be happy, and they make the decisions, but their decisions end in unhappiness. The man who lets God decide for him and lets God direct is the one who is truly happy because God knows what's best for us. And God is concerned with our happiness. Of course, you know, the trouble is, we don't do what David did. Oh, we come to God in prayer. But even very often when we talk to God about His will, what do we say? We come along and say, Lord, I'd like you to tell me what to do, but please tell me to do this. Like the young man, he was really concerned about things, he really concerned about his life, and he felt it was time he was getting married. But I talked to such a young man not very long ago, he puts it before the Lord, puts it before the Lord, this problem of wanting a wife. But this young fellow, so he says, Lord, send me a wife, but let it be Mary. Send me, we come to God, we're supposed to ask God to tell us what to do. Show me your way, but let me go the way I've already chosen. And, it's sometimes a little bit overdone. I know one young man, he can be carried to ridiculous extremes. One young man not long ago, he thought about moving to a certain... I've got to be very careful here because otherwise somebody might catch on. He thought about moving to a certain place, and he made inquiries about a certain house, and he made an offer for that house. Well, I'm afraid that his offer wasn't big enough, and he couldn't raise his offer, he didn't have the money. But he took that in his stride. He said, now, well, the Lord has decided. Now, of course, that's to my mind, an easy thing to say. Of course, if the offer that he made for the house had been big enough, he would have taken it of the Lord. He would have said, well, the Lord wants me to have that house. It's very easy to interpret your own decisions and the way that things turn out as being the will of God, when very often it's simply that it's your own will. So be very careful about this. Certainly put your way before God and say with David, I don't want to carry on too much along that line because we'll never get through the song. Make thy way before my face. But then of course in verse 9 he can't get these wicked people out of his mind. He's there in worship, but it's a problem with him. And he's thinking about his enemies. And they're looking there to catch him, and he describes their wickedness. For there is no faithfulness in their mouth, no steadfastness. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. That comes in the New Testament, in Romans chapter 3. And with their mouths they have spoken deceit. Paul is describing sinful people. in Romans 3. Hold them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. And this again is something that occurs in the Psalms, where the psalmist on one occasion says, the wicked have dug a pit and they've fallen in it themselves. And so here he says, let them fall by their own counsels. Let them fall into their own trap. Thrust them out of the multitude of their transgressions. Thrust them out in the multitude of their transgressions. For they have rebelled against thee. Now this is one of the things that suggests to me that it was David as king facing the rebellion raised by his son Absalom and his followers. Because remember, in Old Testament times, a king was not a king such as we have today. In Old Testament times, the king was God's vice-regent. The king reigned under God. The king was God's representative. That's why, time and time again, he's called the Lord's anointed. I wouldn't say that any king or queen existing today fits quite into the pattern of Old Testament royalty. Because I'm afraid that in many, many instances, it's not God at all who appoints royalty. But in Old Testament times it was. God was to be king of his people. And when the people did not want God to reign, a king was appointed to reign for God over his people. And consequently, any rebellion against the king in Old Testament times was a rebellion against God. And that's why he says here, they have rebelled against thee. But then you come on to what I think is the loveliest part of the psalm. From verse 11. But let all those that put their trust in thee rejoice. Let them shout for joy because thou defendest them. This again, he's praying for those who put their trust in God. Let them also that love thy name be joyful in thee. Now, here again, that's interesting. David was aware of the fact that the one who believes in God and submits his life to God is no miserable person. Now you do get that, I will admit, there are some people who give the wrong impression about religion. Who give the impression that if you're a Christian, you've got to go around with a perpetual gloom among you, that it's a sin to be happy, it's a sin to smile, and it's almost, positively indecent in their book, ever to be happy. Because they talk about this is a weary, sinful world and all the rest of it, and they sing those hymns that talk about traveling through this weary wilderness, and this vale of tears, and all the rest of it. All right, it may be a vale of tears, it may be a weary wilderness, but this does not mean that that's the character of the one who's doing the traveling, the character of the pilgrim. The one who is in touch with God is a happy person. And I can't stress this too much. That happiness and joy is not something waiting for you in heaven. It's something that begins now if you're a Christian. And the verse that comes time and time again to my mind, John 10 and 10, when Jesus says, I am come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. And he's not talking about heaven. He's not talking about pie in the sky when you die. He's talking about the quality of your life now. And, if you've any doubt about this, I wish you could have talked to one of the ladies who was baptized this last week in Edinburgh. Her husband is a soldier, and he's in and out of Belfast quite a lot. She's lived a very hard life in military camps in Europe, and she's seen the kind of life that goes on among non-Christians. She's participated in it. But we talked with her on the other day, Thursday, and her name is Mrs. McTavish. I said, well, how are things? Oh, she said, wonderful. She said, I never knew it could be like this. She said, this is the best in 25 years. That sounds like come to the cookhouse door or something like that. But I mean, she said, it's so wonderful. It's so wonderful. And the transformation that's come into that woman's life, you have to talk to her to appreciate it. And I said, look, if somebody had told you before you became a Christian it was going to be like this, would you believe it? She said, no. I said, could you have understood it? She said, no. I said, can you explain it to anybody now? She said, no. It's something to be experienced rather than to be explained. And this is why it only will get into the hearts and minds of people that to be a Christian means to be a happy person. Not because you have to stimulate it from inside yourself, not because it's self-induced, but because it springs from the fact that God is your Father and you're aware of the relationship you have with God. That you're living a full life. That's what the psalmist says. For thou wilt bless the righteous. O Lord, thou wilt compass him with favor as with a shield. So it ends on this note of confidence. He's confident that what he's prayed about is going to receive, and there's not the least note of doubt or uncertainty in this man's voice. Now, that was...
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. Though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ hath regarded my helpless estate, and hath shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. Praise the Lord, oh my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. And Lord, haste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall resound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul, with my soul. It is well with my soul. Who the door is standing, patiently drawing near, entrance within demanding, whose is the voice I hear? Sweetly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with thee. All through the dark hours dreary, knocking again is he. Jesus, art thou not weary, waiting so long for me? Sweetly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with thee. Door of my heart, I hasten, thee will I open wide. Though he rebuke and chasten, he shall with me abide. Sweetly the tones are falling, open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with